went down to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, and you remember what happened? He went to the temple and it was a total mess. There were people selling animals, there were money changers, and it was just one big marketplace. And Jesus, he did something radical. He turned over the tables of coins, he drove out the animals, and he said, look, you are destroying the worship of my people. And at that very moment, he set up an antagonism between himself and the people who were the religious movers and shakers of that time. I mean, there was no doubt that there was going to be controversy. In fact, what did he say? You have made my Father's house a den of thieves. He's saying, I've got this very special relationship with my Father. So you've got that tension already between Jesus and the religious leaders. Now he stays in Jerusalem, and he continues to do miracles. And of course that has a tremendous effect on the people. So much so that people like Nicodemus are starting to take note. And so Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. Maybe he was scared to be seen by Jesus. Maybe he just wanted some quiet time. A time when people wouldn't be surrounding Jesus. But he comes to Jesus, and he's very respectful. He says, Rabbi. He calls him teacher. Now, Nicodemus is probably in his 60s or his 70s, and he calls Jesus, who is 30, teacher. That's significant. And he says, you know, you have some special powers. You have something to give this world that only God could give you. So he really does show a lot of respect. Now, here's the interesting thing, and it's so typical of Jesus. You think that with Nicodemus having been so courteous to Jesus, Jesus would be courteous to Nicodemus. But he isn't. He just comes right back at him and says, Nicodemus, you need to be born again. And this is the way Jesus works. And it's sometimes we have a tough time with it. Jesus doesn't worry about etiquette or being courteous, although those things are very, very important. But when Jesus deals with people, there's only one thing that matters. It's what's your heart relationship with Him? That's all He's concerned about in your life. And so sometimes you may think, why is Jesus doing this? Why is He treating me this way? Well, He's trying to mold your heart. He's trying to get your heart into that right relationship with Himself. And that's what Nicodemus needed. Nicodemus, he was the classic do-it-yourselfer when it came to religion. He was a Pharisee. He was a guy that was about laws. I've done this and I've done that. And Jesus comes and He just blows that all apart. He shatters it. He says, Nicodemus, the way you're thinking isn't going to work when it comes to God. You're thinking, okay, God, when I die, I'm going to tell you all these things that I did, and I have been a pretty good guy. And then you're going to say, Nicodemus, you've been a good guy. Come on into heaven. Jesus says you need to be born again. He's saying that way isn't going to work. God's ways are not our ways. And this is a good place to start. Why do we need to be born again? Why do we need this new life? And the first reason is because God's standards are so different than ours. Has this ever happened to you where you've been transferred from one position to another position, and you got kind of accustomed in your previous work to a certain level of production and performance, and then you get sent to another area, and you start working, and the boss comes and says, whoa, he says, you got to do way more. You go, what? And he explains all that you got to do, and it's up here compared to what you were doing. And it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to get used to doing more than doing less. But the standards are different. We are really seeing this with high school kids. Kids go through high school and they get straight A's all 4 years. And then they go to college and they think, well, I might not get all A's, but I'll get B's and a few A's. And the first year ends and they're barely passing. And they're thinking, did I get dumb all of a sudden? No, what happened? There's two different standards between college and high school, right? That's kind of incredible that we have the audacity to think that God's standards have to be just like ours. It's kind of a weird way of thinking. I mean, we talk about God in such grand and glorious terms. He's infinite. He's all-powerful. He's all-knowing. But when it comes to the standards for getting into heaven, we just make him a souped-up version of ourselves. And we say, well, God likes this, and God doesn't like that. And, oh, well, I'm a little weak in this area, but God probably is a little weak in that area too, so he doesn't mind that. And we make his standards to be like ours when it comes to what do you have to do to get into heaven. And that's just not the case. We heard it today. What did Jesus say? He said, this tit-for-tat type of goodness, well, you say hi to me, and I say hi to you. That's superficial. He says, everybody does that. Even somebody who doesn't want to have anything to do with God is nice to the people who are nice to him. Jesus talks about loving our enemies. And then he sums it up. He says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And we go, what? We're in trouble. But those are God's standards. And doesn't it make sense that God's standards are going to be way up there? And you say, well, I don't know. I think it's kind of petty of God. I think it's petty of God to have all these standards and all these rules and say you've got to live up to that. Well, you don't have any standards? You've got standards. Every one of us has standards. And it's those standards that cause the fights in our life, right? You didn't leave there. You didn't put the cap on the toothpaste tube again. Huh? That's a standard, isn't it? What's the problem? The other person says that's a stupid standard, right? But that's what the fights in our life are about so often. We have standards. Now you say, yeah, well, that's kind of a foolish standard. But there's some important standards, aren't there? Do you want your doctor to have some standards? Do you want your doctor who went through med school to fulfill some standards? You don't want some guy, you go in there and get your tonsils taken out, and he comes out and tells the one that's waiting for you, well, I took out his heart. I know, but everybody makes a mistake. You want somebody who knows what they're doing if they're going to operate on you. You want them, you don't care what their personality is like, you don't care about anything except what is there, what are the standards that they have met to perform surgery. So we have all sorts of standards in our lives and we live by them. Let me tell you something. If you think it's important for your doctor to have met certain standards, it's absolutely necessary for God to have perfect standards. Because if there are no standards, no perfect standards of right and wrong, life just crumbles. Then it means that all we are is what evolution says, sophisticated animals. We're born, we spend some time here, we die, and that's all it's about. Without the standards of God, life, as we know it, a life of meaning, a life of purpose, a life that goes on for eternity, is absolutely meaningless. But of course there's a problem. God has these perfect standards. So the next step in understanding why we need to be born again is to simply say we've got to be honest with ourselves. One of the worst and most frustrating things in life is to be deluded about something. What does it mean to be deluded? It means you think things are the way they are, or you think things are this way, but they're not. It's a false understanding. And it's such a hard thing, isn't it? Because you make decisions, you do certain things, you work toward an end, and then you don't make any progress because that's not the way things are. It's like shadow boxing. You ever going to get any satisfaction out of shadow boxing? No, because you don't ever hit anything. And that's what a delusion is. You're not operating on the way things are. The biggest delusion in life is God, I'm really a good person. That's not dealing with reality. That's just looking at things very superficially. The best example of this is a parable Jesus taught. Do you remember the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee? They both go to the temple to pray, and the tax collector, he's living in the real world. He just falls down to his knees and he says, "Have mercy on me, a poor miserable sinner." Well, what does the Pharisee say? He's living in a fantasy world. He says, "Oh God, I thank you that I am such a good person. I have just done so many good things for you, God. Thank you." And let me go on and tell you how good a person I am. And he's living in a world where all he's thinking about is, well, if I don't do public bad things,